In fact, there are probably 50 different Hebrew verbs that like these ones we've just been looking at, that picture the end of the wicked, involving, 50 Hebrew verbs, and it's probably 75 different pictures, 75 different metaphors or similes, figures of speech, and they all sound like total destruction. For example, the wicked will be like wax that melts. Next. Just keep punching here. Smoke that vanishes, straw that burns, dream from which one awakens, slug that melts. That's one of my favorite ones, having been a little boy and putting salt on snails. Ashes trodden underfoot, chaff carried off by the wind. The Old Testament's full of this kind of expression. The wicked will be like this. And so to the traditional view has to say the wicked will actually not be like wax that melts. The wicked will never be like smoke that vanishes. The wicked will not be like straw that burns. The wicked have nothing to resemble the dream from which one awakens. There's no comparison between the end of the wicked and the slug that melts. Ashes trodden underfoot don't have anything to do with the end of the wicked. Chaff carried off by the wind is a complete different picture from the end of the wicked. The traditional view has to say all of that. And yet the Bible has 75 different pictures. It says this is the way the wicked will be. And it's a real puzzlement for those who hold the traditional view. For that reason, I think, not impugning any ill intent, but for just lack of something to say, most books that teach the traditional view make a statement similar to this, that the Old Testament says very little about the end of the wicked. Because what they really are meaning is the Old Testament says very little about what I believe the end of the wicked is. And they go to the Old Testament looking for traditional hell, and they can't find it anywhere, so they say, well, the Old Testament doesn't talk about the end of the wicked. But they're missing the fact that the Old Testament has a lot to say about the end of the wicked. It just doesn't say what they were looking for. If we look at Paul, there are three main words in Paul's writings about the end of the wicked are these words. Death, as in Romans 6:23. Destruction, 2 Thessalonians 1:9. He will punish these with eternal destruction. And perish, Romans 2:12. Those who are without the law will perish without the law. So Paul's three main words. If we say, Paul, what do you know about hell? Paul would say, well, actually, I never use the word. That's interesting. The word hell only is found about 12 or 13 times in the New Testament. One of those is in James that says the tongue is set on fire by hell. All the other times it's used, the word is used by Jesus. And it's always used talking to Jews, never Gentiles. And it's always used talking to Jews who live in or around Jerusalem, never somewhere else. And the rest of the New Testament outside the Gospels never uses the word hell to talk about the end of the wicked. Why is that? Because hell is translated from the word Gehenna, which was this city dump outside Jerusalem. And that was something the Jews knew about, but the Gentiles and everybody else in the world would not have understood what Gehenna is talking about. So Paul uses language they could understand. If you say, Paul, what will happen to the wicked? He said, well, I use three words: die, perish, destroy. Which one of those do you not understand? It's just so clear if we let it say what it says. And one of the good things about this position, as opposed to the traditional view, is you can quote Scripture and just leave it hanging there and say it just means what it says. But if you have the traditional view, you have to say, well, it's death, but it really isn't death. It means they keep living forever, but they wish they could die. And it is really destruction. They never are really destroyed, but it's some other kind of use of the word. And it isn't really perishing, it's something else, but that's the word Paul used because he just used that word. Well, that's just nonsense. It's die, perish, and destroy. It means just what it says, and we can leave it at that. So we look at historical pictures of divine judgment. And there are two great ones in the Old Testament, the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. What happened in the flood? Well, everybody's destroyed, wiped out, abolished, blotted out. They're not here any longer. And then you look at Sodom and Gomorrah. What happened? Well, they're totally wiped out. The next day there's nothing left but smoke. Well, I can understand what happened to those people. But it's interesting then to look at the New Testament and see that when Peter and Jude want to describe the end of the wicked at the last day, what do? They say, well, it'll be like what happened to the people in the flood. They'll be destroyed. It'll be like what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. That was an example of those who suffer eternal fire. So it says, here's another part of the picture. Historical examples, both of them clear, and they mean totally wiped out. but then wonder what the prophets may say. So we go through all the prophets and get prophetic pictures of divine judgment. And they say he slays the wicked with the sword of his mouth. They'll be like a broken potter's vessel. They'll be like the garbage dump outside Jerusalem. They'll be cut off, neither root nor branch will be left. There'll be ashes under the soles of the feet. And we say, well, that's pretty clear. The Old Testament says a lot about the end of the wicked. It just doesn't say what I grew up thinking.